Everyone. Thanks so much for being here this morning. We have a lovely room of individuals, and we also are welcoming over 150 online today, or at least that's how many are registered. So we've got quite an online presence and in the room today. So thank you all for being here. My name is Katie Ellefson. I'm a Community Health Program Manager with the Community Health and Partnerships team at Health Partners. Got a great group of folks who work on putting this together. I also want to shout out to Kristen Mullen, who might be at home. She's a colleague who actually just welcomed little Lewis. I'm sure she's having lots of little moments with him right now. This marks the third year of Little Moments Count in the St. Croix Valley, and we're so thankful to have all sorts of great partners who are committed to those first 1,000 days and supporting kids and families in the St. Croix Valley. So thank you all for being here to do this work together. I also want to extend a sincere thank you to the St. Croix Valley Foundation for their continued support through the First 1,000 Days Fund. Really appreciate that and couldn't do that without that financial support. It's just really great to have us all be together, whether you're a caregiver, a professional, an educator, community partner, advocate, physician. We're just so thankful for everyone doing what's best for families in those first years of life. I'm going to pass it off to Dr. Mike Adams. He's a family medicine physician at Health Partners, and he's going to give us opening remarks.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. It's welcome to everyone here in person. It's great to see everybody, and warm welcome to everybody online as well. So as Katie mentioned, I practice family medicine at Health Partners in Stillwater. I've been there for a little over 20 years. And I'm also the medical consultant for the Department of Public Health and Environment for Washington County. So I come to this topic with great interest in a few different ways. One is my role as a family physician, getting to care for little ones and adults and their caregivers. Through the public health lens, clearly we see that early childhood wellness and health and development is crucial for health throughout the lifespan. And also as a parent. So my wife and I have a 19-year-old daughter and a 21-year-old son. So we're well past the early years at this point, but they kind of sear into your brain pretty well over time. And it's fantastic to have that experience. And it's cool to be here because this is actually the site of the first overnight camps that my kids ever did when they were little through Camp St. Croix, and we did some summer programs here as well. So it's been a while since I've been back. So this is pretty neat. One of my favorite parts of my job as a family doc is getting to care for little ones all the way through the lifespan. And so I still do newborn care in the hospital. So from the time I walk in and meet a newborn, often know the parents already, it's kind of a joy to get to see them sort of transform before your eyes as you see them for their newborn visit and their 2-month visit and 4-month visit. And especially when you're not seeing them every day, it's like every time they come in, it's like, oh my gosh, look at what look at how far they've come and what they're doing. And so that's kind of a really cool perspective for me. And I think that longitudinal view really gives you an idea of why those first few years of life are so crucial in terms of nurturing and child development and really brain growth and health. And so brain growth or brain development starts before birth in the womb. We know that babies can hear ambient noise from outside the womb. They will learn to recognize their mom's voice, its cadence, its rhythm, even the language to some degree. There is some pretty good research to suggest that after babies are born, they will still recognize songs and stories that they've been told in the womb. So pretty cool, huh? This is where the science geeky part of my brain gets excited. Our brain is full of billions of connections between nerve cells and neurons that help us think and act and feel. And in the first few years of life, we are creating 1 million neural connections every second. It's astounding, 1 million a second, right? And what we know is that the ones that get exercised the most, that get the most attention, are the ones that get the strongest. And so we're really, as we nurture kids and help them with their development, we're helping their brain wire in such a way that it provides them that foundation really throughout their life for good health. And I think one of the key messages is that kids' brains are built through human interactions, not perfect parenting, not educational apps, not expensive toys, but human interaction. One of the other cool parts of my job that I've gotten to do a number of times now is my wife and I go down, she's a family physician too. And so we go down to rural Honduras, to the Mesquite, in the really far eastern part of the country on the border with Nicaragua, in a part of the country that really doesn't get healthcare for most of the year. There's no electricity, there's no running water, tech, as you can imagine. And it's really cool to be in that environment and watch families and kids and see how everyone interacts when there aren't the devices and the distractions and the things that we're all used to in our world today. And just those kind of foundational interactions, the play, the singing, the talking, there's kind of this like background soundtrack of kids running around and laughing. And it's really kind of cool to see that perspective compared to what we've all sort of become used to in our current lives. And so those little moments, the talking, the reading, the playing, the responding to cues, the being present are the things that make such an important difference as kids' brains are wiring for learning, for memory, for attention, for trust, and for emotional connection. So since we see brains develop so rapidly in those first 1,000 days of life, it gives us this really important opportunity to make a meaningful impact and support health and development early on. And that's where Little Moments Count comes in. So Little Moments Count is a community effort focused on the first 1,000 days of life, helping to make the science of early brain development more simple, practical, and accessible. The focus is on these everyday moments: talking, singing, reading, playing. Play is learning, and helping caregivers, and really important, helping caregivers feel supported and confident in those interactions. As it's expanded in St. Croix Valley over the last few years, there's been this strong and growing network of partners come together to support families and the community, share resources, and strengthen connections. And that brings us to today's topic. Families currently are navigating a world where screens and devices are a really regular part of daily life. And again, from the parent perspective, I can really appreciate how challenging this is for young families, since that wasn't so much of a thing when our kids were little. We kind of caught the middle school and high school and COVID and online learning and all that, and trying to navigate that. So I appreciate the challenge very much. There's a lot of mixed messages and uncertainty about what's helpful, what's harmful, and how do we find a balance. So the goal isn't perfection. It's about supporting connection and relationships and the overall well-being in a world that looks different now than it did even just a generation ago. And we get bombarded, I think, nowadays with conflicting advice about children, childhood, parenting, technology, and mental health. And so in that setting, we're grateful to have Erin Walsh here to help bring some clarity and connection. As co-founder of Minnesota-based Spark and Stitch Institute, she's worked with communities across North America, translating research into practical, easy to understand strategies for parents and professionals. Her work's been featured in outlets like the Washington Post, Minnesota Public Radio, Parents.com, and Psychology Today, among others. She's the co-author of the best-selling Why Do They Act That Way?, which I find myself asking all the time about my adult kids also. Her latest book is It's Their World, Teen Screens and the Science of Adolescence, and it's now available. Beyond her expertise, Erin brings warmth, humor, real-life experience, and stories, which remind us that we already have what we truly need to support our kids in meaningful ways. With that, I'd like to welcome Erin Walsh.
Thank you for the handoffs. Thank you so much for the warm welcome. I know that you won't be able to stay with us this morning, but your patients are glad that you're racing back. Welcome to all of you in the room. Welcome to the many of you who are joining us online, and we're going to bring you into the conversation as much as possible. I do appreciate the formal bio, but as we think about our precious time together this morning, I want to assure you that I'll be wearing a couple of different hats during our conversation. And the first is absolutely an evidence-based hat. So as co-founder of Spark and Stitch Institute, I do spend a lot of time looking at the data. I spend a lot of time talking to researchers across the country who are busily trying to better understand what's going on in this miracle perched on top of children's shoulders as they learn and as they grow in a world dominated by screens. So I'll be wearing my evidence-based hat. I will also, though, always be wearing my parenting hat when we're talking about kids and screens. I also do not have young children anymore. My kids are now preteens and teens, but there is nothing like screen time to bring parents on a collision course between what we thought we would do, the ideal practices, and the messy realities and tricky trade-offs. And am I doing this right? And this one-size-fits-all solution is falling apart with my specific kid. And so I welcome you to wear multiple hats in this conversation as well. How many of you are wearing primarily a professional hat? So you work with children or families, or your work influences children and families. Okay, great. How many of you are wearing a parenting or caregiving hat as well? A lot of us. How many of you were children at one point in your lives? Some of you, nope. Don't make me go back there. I asked the first two questions because bring all those hats into the room. I asked the third one not just to be facetious, but because anytime we're talking about parenting or screens, it is helpful to bring up that critical nutrient called empathy and our ability to remember. Sometimes, even if we can't remember what it felt like to be a baby, conjuring up what it felt like to be growing so much in that transformational time of childhood and on into adolescence, which we will not be talking about today, but the work that we do in 0 to 5 and beyond, of course, shapes developmental trajectories. And as we think about developmental trajectories, certainly the world has changed since I was heading off to my first day of kindergarten at Seward School in South Minneapolis. I have a brand new pink backpack. I am pumped about what's to come. My brother Dan, not so much. He already looks deeply disillusioned with what's coming to him heading into 3rd grade. But if you think about the media ecology of my childhood, this is just a fancy way to talk about what kind of screens did we have? How did we store data? How did we share data? It wasn't that long ago that we could turn on the evening news and see clips like this.
That 56 pass.
That was 56 pass. I wasn't prepared to translate that.
That little
As I was doing
Oh, that's
that little
right.
mark with the A and then the ring around it.
At.
See, that's what I said. Katie said she thought it was about,
Yeah. Oh.
but I'd never heard
Or
it.
around.
I'd
or
never heard it
about.
said. I'd always seen the
Right.
mark, but never heard it said. And then it sounded stupid when I said it. Violence at NBC.
I heard be around or about.
in the lunchroom the other
See,
week.
there it is. Violence at NBC. GE.com. I mean,
Well, Allison should know.
what
do you
is
say to
internet
Allison?
anyway?
Internet is that massive computer network. The one that really big now. No, a lot of people use it to communicate. I guess they can communicate with NBC writers and producers. Allison, can you explain what internet is?
No, she can't say anything in 10 seconds.
We're in the middle of sort of breathtaking transformation and change. Let's just situate the work that we're doing in this pace of change where we've gone from a media ecology that looks like this to when I started in the field, a media ecology that looks like this. More screens, more devices, more stories, more powerfully presented to young children than any other time in history. And of course, even our 5-year-old friends would be quick to point out that this is an old-timey image because it has things like DVDs, CDs, and beyond. And as we fast forward to today, of course, we could spend the whole morning just doing statistics, and we won't. Anyone working with children, parenting children, knows that we are living in a state sort of deep digital immersion, where the average 0 to 8-year-old or birth to 8 spends about 2.5 hours on average with entertainment media. By elementary age, that bumps up to 5.5 hours a day with entertainment media, and on into our teen years, clocking over 8 hours a day with entertainment media. Oh, that was fun. That was like a video game interlude. By age 2, 4 in 10 kids have their own personal tablet. As we think about the trends that are emerging right now, as media becomes more individualized, more personalized, and of course, not spread evenly in our population, families in lower income households tend to have more screen time than families in higher income households. We are going to work very hard this morning to not tell a simple story about statistics like this, where we start to say, oh, we just have to think about then getting to parents. When we look at the relationship between income and screen time, we know it's a lot more complicated than that. And in this country, screens tend to fill the gaps where families are being left behind, where they can't access the resources they need and rely on screens sometimes more heavily than their better resourced peers. So we're going to think about what that means in the context of working with broad swaths of families and giving them the kind of targeted supports we actually need. And if we blink, this will change. This is the lesson of the digital revolution. How many of you, by raise of hands, and those of you online can just note to yourself, have been taught how to fix something or how to do something with a device by a very young child? I will never forget, a friend of mine was trying to set a loving limit with his 2-year-old, and his 2-year-old was not experiencing that limit as very loving, and got up on her chair and she started going like this. And he was like, what are you doing? She was like, Daddy, I want to make you smaller. So as we think about the sort of emerging literacies, if we blink, it will change. Boston's Digital Wellness Lab predicts that the AI toys industry will be a $106 billion industry in the next decade. So as AI integrates not just into our home assistants, but into companions for young children, learning partners, and embedded into their daily toys. As I even share just a few of those statistics, my guess is that it brings up some feelings and that you come into this conversation both professionally and personally with some mixed feelings. And you are definitely in the right place for this conversation this morning if there are times where you feel profound gratitude for being alive in a time where we can access the incredible resources of Little Romans Count, where we can get on to workshops like this from the comfort of our homes or offices, where you feel like, what a time to be alive. But you are definitely not alone if you are like the thousands of caring adults I've had the opportunity to talk with across the country, who also come into this room and log in online with some concern, with worries, either because you're observing ways in which screens are contributing to children's suffering, or because you're just not sure. What is the impact of all of this time with media? And you are definitely not alone if you feel sort of a tender and volatile mix of both of these feelings, depending upon how the day is going. So we are going to be walking through the research. We're going to be walking through some protective factors, especially as it relates to our well-being, emotional regulation, stress. But you are bringing enormous expertise into the room as well. So we don't have all day together, so we're going to have to do this kind of quickly. But I want to get a sense of what you're bringing into the room very briefly. And to do that, here's what we're going to do. Those of you in the room, not yet, but in a moment, I'd like you to turn to somebody close to you, introduce yourselves if you haven't already, and just take a little assessment of where you're at right now. Are you coming into this room being like, without this, I'd still be in Stillwater, but for Google Maps, who sent me in the right place? Are you feeling grateful for technology? Or are you coming into this room filled with concern, existential dread, something in between? And specifically what? What are you observing or experiencing or thinking about related to your concerns? Okay, those of you online, if you're watching it in a group, turn to the person next to you. If you are watching this alone, turn to yourself. And that goes for all of you as well. A couple things to take the pressure off. I am not asking you to turn to somebody at your table and share your grand thesis of all things humanity and screens. It is way too early for that, and we barely had our coffee. The second thing to take the pressure off is you are all adult learners. This is a challenge by choice invitation. So if you are sitting here thinking, please don't make me talk to someone. It's too early. This is an opportunity for you to turn to a neighbor and say, I'm going to take a little me time. Okay. And you're going to take 2 minutes of quiet reflection. Okay. We're going to do this fairly quickly. So those of you online, we have 2 minutes. Everybody in the room, those of you who can't wait to talk to your neighbor, that's 1 minute each. Those of you who are engaging in me time, enjoy your coffee. Are you worried? Are you grateful? And why? Okay, ready, set, go. Alright, if you haven't switched, be sure to switch partners. Make sure everybody can talk. All right, wrap up your conversations. Share your final thoughts. We're going to come back together in 3, 2, 1. Amazing. We had all day. If this was an all-day retreat, we could really keep talking. For those of you who are online, feel free to write in the chat. Are you grateful? Are you worried? Why? And Sydney will be taking a look at those and seeing what comes in from our friends online. We're just going to get 1 or 2 here in the room before we keep rolling. But who said something or heard something related to how they're watching screens benefit children or family systems? Something that maybe you're grateful for. And if you didn't hear it, maybe something comes to you spontaneously. How are you watching young children benefit or families with young children benefit from screens? So when they're doing it together, they're playing together, they are watching things together, they're laughing, they're learning together. Absolutely. 1 more.
Engaging, okay. Joy. Program.
Yes.
They're getting.
Yes.
Maybe inside.
Yeah, so there's engaging programs or content that are maybe helping them scaffold some experiences, but also maybe getting them moving, inviting them up, right? Getting them to engage with each other. So learning, connecting. If we were to go around the room, with some encouragement, every single one of us could come up with benefits. The reason we're starting with the benefits and some of the observed benefits is not just because it feels good to start in the happy place before we go to the darkness. But because one of our jobs as parents or as people who work with families is to hold up an accurate mirror to our digital lives, to see our digital strengths, to see the ways that families are using technology to connect and to learn and to access supportive resources. And one of our jobs is to see that, mirror that back, and celebrate the strengths that we see. And if we stop seeing them, we are missing a huge opportunity, right, to hold up an accurate mirror. But I'm not surprised that you didn't all choose to be in the Discovery Center above all the other places you could have been this morning. I'm not surprised that you're here just because you're like, no notes. It's pretty great. No concerns. My guess is that you come in here with some significant worries and concerns as well. And we're just going to have time for 2 because we're going to keep rolling. But what came to the top of your list as you thought about things that you're worried about, concerned about, either that you're experiencing or just that you're not certain? And if anything's coming in from online, Sydney, let me know. Yeah. Yep. So disinformation for children, also for their caregivers, right? Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, so what is the opportunity lost of maybe not learning to do the basics when we're sort of skipping forward, especially as we think about AI? Maybe that's a whole session for next year. Yeah. Is there one coming in online? Yeah.
affecting the mental health of children, youth, and adults. Adults who may be limiting screen time for their children is one thing, yet they do not seem to limit their own screen time. Children and youth are watching the adults in their lives. I love screen time for FaceTime calls with my family and friends, and especially grandchildren.
Beautiful. So many things. Was that all from one person or was that a summary? Somebody was like, ba da ba ba ba. Yes. Yeah, mic drop from the internet. So certainly that summarizes so much of what we're thinking about. What's the cost of what we're not doing? What kind of content are we consuming? We are going to be talking a lot today about what is the role of adult screen time use in the relationships that we have with young children. And certainly our concerns, whether they are observed or whether we are reading articles and staying up to date in the field, of course, our concerns are rooted in some amount of evidence. No doubt you have swiped through headlines or been to other workshops where we are looking at these sort of what often are referred to as these like twin trend lines. On one hand, the amount of time that young children and families are spending with screen media and time online and entertainment technologies, and this association, especially in excessive screen use, with outcomes that we don't want for kids. Right. So as we're thinking about challenges with emotional regulation, if we're thinking about sort of school readiness and literacy, as we're thinking about some of the stuff related to physical activity, that we do see that these sort of excessive screen use is often paired, right, with some of these outcomes that we are concerned about for young children. And when I am looking at population level data like this, to me, this is like a spotlight for our collective attention. When we're thinking about these trends of sort of like excessive screen use being paired with emotional regulation difficulties, to me, that's like, hey, pay attention. This is why we have organizations like Little Moments Count, right? Where we're really thinking about how do we invest in those early years. It says, stop for a moment and pause and remember that we can't think about early childhood development without taking into account the powerful role that screens have in their lives. The challenge is that when we stay in this population level statistics, we can start to tell a very simplified story about screens and families. And the simplified story is that screens plus kids equals inevitable decline in all things good, right? Kids plus screens equals bad. And we do sort of experience a steady drumbeat of that messaging, partly rooted in the evidence, and also partly because we're trying to figure out what is the kind of messaging that we can use to help activate our attention to this important issue. The challenge is that this simple equation falls apart very quickly when we turn away from population level data and towards a living, breathing 2-year-old, and towards a living, breathing family system with 4 kids, parenting across households, and trying to figure out what is the impact of screens on the outcome of this individual child. And once we're starting to do the work on the ground with our own kids or with families, we need to write a more nuanced equation. And of course, luckily, the data is already doing this for us, right? This is why the American Academy of Pediatrics' latest policy statement on children and screens reminds us that it's actually quite complicated. That it's not just about the mere presence or absence of a screen. It's not just about adding up minutes or hours in front of a screen, though important. It's also about who that kid is, what's going on with a caregiver and their relationship with the child and other things in the caregiver's life, what's going on in terms of the digital ecosystem, how are platforms designed, where are they spending their time, and what are the institutions, systems, policies, and laws that either open up opportunities for parenting or get in our way. Now, as we think about what this looks like, this is not a brand new revelation. As we've been thinking about screen time from a data-driven perspective, the idea of screen time as just minutes and hours in front of a screen fell apart kind of a long time ago as the sole driver of children's outcomes. Important, we're not going to get rid of it entirely, but this is why the American Academy of Pediatrics has moved towards, and some of you might be familiar with, the sort of 5 C's model, that looking at what's going on with the child, what kind of content are they consuming, what are their strategies for getting to calm? We'll be focusing a lot on that this morning. What is it crowding out? So your question about what are they not getting, and what is happening around that child in terms of communication, in terms of helping them organize their media experiences, in terms of creating those little moments of interaction in this critical window of development. So I'm actually really interested in this more nuanced set of questions, not just because it has more fidelity to the data, but because those of us working on the ground, this helps us better understand what are the kinds of supports that we can offer a family, that we can offer ourselves as parents to maximize the benefits and minimize the harms of growing up digital. Questions like, who is this child? What are their unique strengths and vulnerabilities? How many of you have more than one child? All it takes is two to realize the temperament is a real thing. My first child, you take away the iPad when they were little, they're like, okay, moving on. And the second child is like, you have taken my oxygen and I may never recover, right? Same family system, same apps, different child, right? Reacting differently to screens. What are they watching and doing? What kinds of content are they actually interacting with and playing with? How do they manage feelings? We're going to take a deep dive into this one. What is it replacing? And who else is around? When we can start to answer this set of questions, the equation of inevitable decline in healthy outcomes, I think, shifts pretty quickly. And there's a lot that we can do in addition to, and not just only positioning ourselves as our job is to be what we call on-off regulators, where we decide that adults' only job is just to walk around ripping cell phones out of adults' hands and shutting down devices. We're not going to get rid of that role entirely. It's still pretty helpful sometimes, but if that is their only tool in our toolkit, it is woefully insufficient to meet the complexity of family life in 2026. And we are specifically going to pull out this question of how do we manage feelings in our time together this morning. Because if we are to think of one core task of early childhood, it's how do I have big feelings and make them more manageable? And us adults have bodies and brains too. And so I think one of the core tasks of parenthood and of caregiving is how do I have big, intense feelings and make sure that I don't hurt myself or others as I make them more manageable. And we often spend so much time thinking about the child that we forget that parenthood is a very intense, very stressful emotional journey as well. And screens interact with that in some really important ways for us to understand. One of the reasons we want to talk about feelings in early childhood, of course, is because, as you know, and is so core to your professional work, is that this is this window of opportunity and sensitivity, right, for the brain's development, especially in the part of children's brains right behind their forehead, called their prefrontal cortex. So those of you online, no one will actually be able to see you do this. Everyone in the room, I just invite you to put your hand up to your forehead and give it a rub and say thank you for the extraordinary lift of not just trying to stay upright in 2026, but anyone working with children and families, that is what we call a high demand executive function job. We not only are trying to manage our own feelings, but we're trying to co-regulate with other adults and with young children whose brains are under construction. And there are, of course, let's just review the superpowers of this part of the brain inside the baby of a young child and inside our own brains, right? This is often referred to, this part of the brain, as the orchestra conductor in a child's brain, right? The orchestra conductor, because though those executive function skills are seated in the prefrontal cortex, they are harnessing competing procedures and information and memories that are widely distributed throughout the brain so that we can engage in what we call goal-directed behavior. Whether that goal is getting my snow pants on before my snow boots, whether that goal is figuring out how to be angry when somebody took my toy and how to put my hands in my pockets and stomp off instead of hauling off and hitting him in the face. Whether my goal, right, is to get over and stand next to the door so that we can get to our gross motor playtime. These are huge, big, sophisticated cognitive lifts for the brain. And they are a work in progress throughout early childhood. Now, some of you have probably taken, especially those of you who primarily have a professional hat, you've taken deep dives, whole day long trainings in the development of the orchestra conductor. but just a reminder of all of the things that it does, such as it helps us move towards our goals, right? It helps us juggle things in real time. This is where our working memory sits, right? Our ability to take in information from our environment, bring procedures and memories from long-term memory into real-time thinking, right? This is our brain's ability to filter out distractions and prioritize something in front of me. This is my brain's ability to manage big, intense feelings. And if sort of impulse control, emotional regulation is what keeps us in the tracks heading towards our goal, this part of the brain also helps us with cognitive agility and cognitive flexibility. It's what helps us from getting stuck in the tracks. So I've just been explained to the rule of the game, and we're supposed to pass the blue ball to the left, and then the kid next to me takes it and chucks it across the room. I have to adapt and respond, right? What would I do in this situation? Let me try something that hasn't worked before. What might my teacher do, right? Incredibly important for perspective taking, my ability to imagine how someone else might feel, which emerges in early childhood, right? So as we're thinking about these superpowers of the brain, of course, the major window of opportunity for how children learn. Parents are often focused on the what, the letters, the numbers, the colors. The how children learn, the emotional regulation, the managing my behaviors is, of course, that's the construction zone that's wide open during early childhood. This is why it's not surprising. Some of the places where it's most obvious are things like working memory. If you try to give a 2-year-old a multiple step instruction and expect their immature working memory to handle it all, you will likely find them rolling around in the blocks, right? A couple of minutes later. By school age, many children, not all, but many can follow a multiple step instruction because their working memory, right, is strengthening and maturing. Their ability to juggle things coming at them from the world. And so as we think about the development and we're talking with caregivers, they're like, okay, this seems really important, right? This is key to their success in school and life. This is how they learn. School readiness is really about strengthening these skills long before they ever sit down in a classroom. And they're like, great, where's the app? Where are the flashcards? How do we do this? And of course, we know that there's this complex interplay in early childhood in terms of how these skills develop. The first is, of course, their hardwiring. So babies are born into the world with a body and brain that makes them unique. That means that for some children, it takes more or less effort to filter out distractions and focus than for other children, just based on the brain that they brought into the world. But there's this constant interplay, of course, with their experiences. You've probably heard about that from neuroscientists that you're hanging out with, as the neurons that fire together wire together. We talk about that at Spark and Stitch as whatever the brain does a lot of is what the brain gets good at. Whether it is imagination, whether it is empathy, whether it is emotional regulation, whether it is sounds and phonemic awareness, whatever the brain does a lot of is what the brain gets good at. And we all know, based on all of the beautiful flyers, activities, PSAs that Little Moments Count is sending out, how we build those brains is through play, is through interaction, right? It's through rich experiments of what does this grass feel like when my little feet touch it, right? What is the color difference between a red sock and a blue sock as I'm folding the laundry, right? This is how children's brains grow. And as we connect the dots with whatever the brain does a lot of is what the brain gets good at, with 2.5 hours, 5.5 hours, 8.5 hours of entertainment media, we start to ask really important questions of what are we practicing. Now, we could spend the rest of our time together this morning talking about all the ways that things could go wrong. We could spend the rest of our time this morning talking about places we hope babies don't go and things we hope parents don't do. We could spend the rest of the morning talking about all of the things that we need parents to stop doing in order to protect them from some of the negative things that we're seeing online. But a lot of the questions that I'm hearing from parents, the reality is we know a lot about screens and kids, but some of their questions we haven't been studying for very long. So what is the impact of AI toys on babies? We are just beginning to get glimpses into what that looks like. But you know what we have been studying for a long time? Children. We know a lot about kids. And sometimes we can get on this breathless, we don't understand, what is AI doing? Everything is different. And the reality is that in study after study after study, the same protective factors bubble to the top of the list. We could be looking at AI, video games, the latest apps, educational, not educational, and overwhelmingly we learn the same ingredients, that children who have warm and caring connections, especially as we're thinking about emotional regulation. How do I make intense feelings more manageable? That I have opportunities to build the skills of what do I do when I feel overwhelmed? What do I do when I have a big angry feeling for both parents and kids alike? And that I have somebody who cares about me enough to set meaningful and purposeful boundaries so that within those boundaries, I can play and experiment and learn from my mistakes. And when it comes to emotional regulation, of course, we could spend the rest of the time just on this stuff, connection. As you well know, emotional regulation happens in the context of relationships for young babies. And this starts off right away, right? So life for a parent on the outside who's pregnant is not always easy, but life on the inside is not so bad, right? There's like dimmed lights, sound of whooshing fluids. I don't have to eat, it just happens. Now we do have emerging research about stress, sort of, processing the placenta, but for the most part, life on the inside is pretty great. And then comes a rude awakening called my birthday, right? And the first thing I have to do is to get from in here to land. And that in and of itself can be a harrowing experience for everyone involved. Once I hit land, life for newborn baby does not get much easier, right? There are bright lights, noises are very loud. I have a stomach the size of a marble that is empty, and I have to figure out how to get something in it, right? And so what does a newborn baby with a very immature cortex do in response to the stressors of life when on my birthday, when I hit land? What is that incredible adaptive strategy that newborns use? They cry. They don't just cry, they scream. What an adaptive thing for a 2-hour-old baby to do, because then something hopefully magical happens. Where the caregiver hears baby screaming, realizes baby is in distress, and wraps baby up in a blanket, right? Dims the light, right? Holds baby close to their chest, and then makes the sound that caregivers across this globe make to babies in distress. And what is that noise? What is caregiver doing? Reminding baby of what life was like when life was good. Whatever the brain does a lot of is what the brain gets good at. I got almost 10 months of associations between the whooshing of fluids, the going of side by side, right, the dim of lights, to have an activated stress response, and then in concert with the present, attentive, attuned, and responsive caregiver coming back to calm. And of course, as we think about the development of emotional regulation, that is not something that babies do on their own. They outsource it to other human beings. As we do that and the reps go, eventually that little cortex is getting that skill building and practicing that they start to be able to do some of that emotional regulation themselves. Now, the myth of self-regulation, of course, is that even us adults rarely entirely self-regulate. If I came into this room and saw you all and you're like, oh, hey, you again, I would immediately be in great distress. Whereas if I look around and I see present, attentive, attuned, and responsive people, I can do a hard thing because I'm not alone, right? And we continue to rely on adults, even as I start to be able to build my own emotional regulation toolkit to help me. We know that this sort of back and forth, serve and return is the primary way that children are activated and then learn how to come back to calm. So as we connect the dots, then the question becomes, what's the impact of screens in this relationship? And we're going to start not with the kid, but with the parent. And that becomes important because we do have, we even have words for it. Researchers have named it, right? We do have some data that when screens interrupt that kind of back and forth, I have a feeling, I'm helping you manage that feeling, that when screens interrupt that, we do see this increase in what we call externalizing and internalizing behaviors. In other words, as adult absorption in our devices go up, internalizing and externalizing behaviors go up in very young children. What does that look like? Outbursts or a retreat? Now, let's put this in perspective at home. This makes so much sense. If I am standing at my counter and I am scrolling through Instagram, it is very likely that my young child makes an appropriate bid for my attention first. So they start asking my name, right? They tug on my pants, but my absorption rate means that I may not cue in to those first bids for my attention. So then what is a child's option once they're not getting the reaction that they need? Well, there's a couple. One is to escalate, right? Or the other is to stop asking, right? I'll just go take care of myself. And it makes sense then that once that child has escalated in order to get my attention, as a parent, if I have been absorbed into my device and now child is really through the roof with their behaviors in order to get my attention, generally speaking, my reaction isn't to turn to them and be like, oh, honey, what's your unmet need? Generally speaking, what happens is our attention is ripped away from our device to a child whose behavior feels to us like it's out of control and feels like it came out of nowhere, right? So we're likely to have a big emotional response. So this is helpful for us to understand at a first pass, but let's keep digging. Because the easy thing then, we read an article on technoference and we're like, well, our job is just to walk around and shame people in restaurants for being on their phones. Our job is just to tell adults they need to get off their phones. Okay, a worthy goal, but let's keep looking at the data. Because when we actually ask parents why you're looking at your phones, for sure entertainment, for sure sometimes, oh, I didn't mean to. But 75% of parents said that they use their devices to find in the moment parenting strategies. Like, my kid has been screaming all day, what do I do? 79% said device use helps them think of activities to do with their child. And 58% said using a device helps them calm down when they're at their breaking point. And actually very recent data published just this year from Heather Krikorian and her team at the University of Wisconsin-Madison was actually looking at this relationship between not all babies are the same. And fussier toddlers, their parents tend to cope with that fussiness by using their devices a little more often. Now, as in a short-term strategy, what she and her team found was that in really high stress days, when parents took a little break to reset, to get some happy distraction, to access some resources, they actually provided better, more attentive caregiving the next day than parents who did not. That is, the message from that is not to say, hey, this is the only go-to strategy, but it does help us remember that sometimes we idealize what the alternative is. We assume that the alternative to the adult being on their phone is a developmentally appropriate, warm back and forth. And sometimes the alternative to me taking a moment is screaming at my child. And so actually sometimes in the short term for some parents, an adaptive, self-directed, I'm going to take two, can be really helpful. Now, where can this backfire is in whatever the brain does a lot of is what the brain gets good at. An adaptive short-term strategy that patterns over time. Every time I have a big feeling or every time my child has a big feeling, that becomes my go-to. Then it becomes this sort of pattern of virtual escape. And when we have patterns of relying on virtual escape, we tend to see that over time, children, of course, don't practice those self-regulation skills that they need. Adults don't practice the self-regulation skills we need. And over time, those intense feelings, we're better capable of managing them. Does that make sense? So understanding the difference becomes important because then we can start asking a different set of questions when we're working with parents or when you're doing your own self-reflection as a parent. Like, what is the purpose of this? What are the patterns of this? Is this a bad day because nobody slept last night because my kid has an ear infection? Or is this my go-to? And what are we replacing? Are we replacing opportunities for play and for cuddle? Are we replacing opportunities to have a feeling and realize that it's okay to be angry, that we human beings get angry? Or is it replacing something that actually, you know what, this is a better choice. Putting on Daniel Tiger for 20 minutes is the best thing I could do right now, right? And looking at the difference between those. This is backed up by data that shows essentially that when parents' cell phone use is what we call self-directed, they tend to report better outcomes than when the technology is dictating the parents' use. Does this make sense? Meaning, turns out when the use is supportive, when we feel in charge of our use, like I am having a hard day and I'm gonna take 5, is very different from I'm in the middle of a back and forth with my child and then TikTok, ding, right? Buzz. My attention gets yanked away and I find myself in on average a 15 to 20 minute, what we call distraction chain. Because devices are designed to grab and hold our attention, self-directed use is really hard. Self-directed use in an media environment that is built to grab and hold our attention is a Herculean lift for this part of our brain. But when we do it, it tends to predict better outcomes. Then media use that it impedes my life and activities, when I don't feel in control of my use, and when it doesn't fit my goals and my values. And so this becomes important for these kinds of reflection questions are for adults are as much about digital well-being as reducing screen time, right? So how many of you have a device here with you today? So you can take it out. It'd be so nice to hold it against your hand. And I want you to just think of where is the place on your phone where you feel most connected and supported during times of challenge, right? Where is a place where you feel most connected and supported? And then I just want you to take a look at this set of questions and just for yourself, reflect a little bit. And those of you online, you're welcome to put that into the chat. Why do you go here? How does it make you feel? Have you gotten help or support here that otherwise you wouldn't have gotten? Who do you spend time with here? When are you most likely to go here? Are there patterns to that use? And what could you be doing instead? So we're going to take just 1 minute. Those of you who are like, oh, the talking, that was my favorite part so far. You can chat with the person next to you. Just where do you go? One question that has interest to you, right? That's up on the screen here. Just we're going to engage in the courage of introspection. Rather than just talking about children, we're going to think about ourselves. Okay? Ready, set, go. Take another 20 seconds to wrap up your conversations. All right, we're going to wrap up our conversations in 3, 2, 1. So mindset, our ability to reflect, as we look at the people in this country who are doing some of the greatest research on technoference, a lot of their interventions are around helping reflect and then think about how do I take a step into self-directed use. But as we know from being humans and trying to do behavior change, rarely does awareness alone help us make great changes. Like we walk out of here like, I'm never going to use Instagram again. Like we have these grand thoughts, like I wrote in my journal, I had a great meeting with a parent, a home visitor, and now I will be different. And the reality is that usually it's not just about awareness, it's also about building skills. And these skills have to be specific to the reasons why adults are turning to their devices. And the reasons why we're using devices to calm 2, 3, and 4-year-olds down, right? Because as we look at the kinds of things that sometimes parents hear, is like, just be on your phone less. Put down your phone. What's wrong with, don't they care about their children? When in reality, these are very effective short-term strategies. They bring immediate relief. If I don't know what to do with my screaming child, and I have something magical that can make that go away, it's really hard without another set of skills that I'm building to just say, well, I'm going to do things differently. Because instead now I just have a screaming kid without an alternative, without a replacement strategy. And what we know is that parents who use devices to calm children down, in general, tend to have children who have more intense behaviors. And then when it becomes a pattern over time, that intensity is stressful for parents. So then we use devices more to calm them down. Do you see the cycle? Right? But it often starts with, I have an intense child whose the parenting sort of exceeds my current toolkit to feel like I'm capable and successful at helping manage these behaviors. And so can you imagine if the advice is we'll just use your phone less, wildly insufficient. But what we do see is that we can turn this around and it becomes a virtuous cycle, right? I build skills to deal with children's intense feelings. Over time, as that becomes a pattern, whatever the brain does a lot of is what the brain gets good at. I feel more confident as a parent. I start to see growth in my child, right? And then we start to have media be one tool of many in a toolkit. And so we can start to notice when we're working with caregivers, what are your goals? Where do we hear what we call change talk? Meaning I have this sort of short-term strategy that I'm attached to, but I feel like I need to see something change, and because here's my challenges. And we can start to amplify that change talk. Any of you who have done motivational interviewing, any of you who are just here as parents in the room, this is helpful for how we talk to ourselves, right? Because what we do to ourselves is just be on your phone less. We just shame ourselves. A bad parent, see, da, 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 da. Instead of like, well, what is the challenge I'm facing? What skills do I need to build? What other supports might I need to bring in order to help me here? Do I need to talk to my primary care provider? Do I need to talk to the early intervention team? Do I need to access some more affordable resources for after hours childcare? What do I need in order to be able to manage? And so we can start to do these double-sided reflections. And we can practice this with ourselves when we go home today, right? You rely on the tablet to prevent meltdowns while you get things done, right? You're trying to make life happen. That makes sense. But it also sounds to me like you're looking for some strategies to help your child cope with frustration. Is that right? Right? Helping our kids to handle big feelings is exhausting. We want to affirm the big lift that parents in distress are doing. It is hard to parent a young child, right? Can you tell me what you've already tried? What have you been trying? How's it working? When is it working? When is it not working? Would you like some more ideas, right, for how we might be able to handle these intense feelings? This probably in this room sounds very like, oh, of course, we all talk like this. But when it comes to screens, we are very quick sometimes to offer very simple solutions. We strip them out of family context as if the only thing in our job is the screen. The best thing is just to get the screen time down and then we've done our job. That's helpful. But these replacement strategies become important. This man really knew what he was asking with this question. If we are thinking, when I'm doing workshops in elementary age, they're like, please, what do we know about emotional regulation in early childhood? How do we take angry feelings and make them more manageable, right? So increasing this toolkit becomes that learning how to take a big, deep belly breath is as much an intervention for digital well-being as selecting the right app. Right? That it's not just about what's happening on the screen, it's also about what's happening with the child. So I want to pause for a moment, because then we're going to talk a bit about boundaries. That's where feelings tend to really go through the roof. We have some ideas for different content that becomes very important. But I want to pause because we have been kind of racing through not just the data, but also the sort of, so what does this look like at home and how we talk to ourselves, but also how we work with families. What I'd like to do is offer people online the opportunity to reflect for a moment and to think, what questions are bubbling up for you in the context of your home life, in the context of how you are supporting parents. And here in the room, let's take some questions now, and then we'll do a little bit more content before we wrap up. So turn to somebody close to you if you want. If you're looking for more me time, please take it. What question is emerging for you as you think about how to put this into practice? Okay, what questions are coming up for you as you think about how to put this into practice? So we're just going to take 30 seconds, get our sort of brains going, and then we're going to come back and get a few of the questions into the room. Okay, ready, set, go. About 30 more seconds to wrap up your conversations. All right, let's come back together in 3, 2, 1. All right, we have time for a few questions now. Then we are going to talk a little bit about boundaries and content. It's another tool in our toolkit. But one or two, what questions are coming up, either about the research, about what you're seeing on the ground, what you've tried, offering expertise or challenges? What came up in your conversations? Yeah. Mhm. Yeah. Yes. I would say beautiful question. So kind of talked about screen addiction. How do we help children navigate away from screens? Let's talk about that for a moment. And it might be hard for you to bounce around slides. Can you bounce around slides? I don't want the online people to be worried, but or I can talk about it verbally, and then I can send you some handouts. But so let's talk about this for just a moment. Just a reminder that internet addiction is not technically a diagnosable disorder in the United States. So the World Health Organization has had internet gaming disorder on the books for a long time. But in the United States, we call it problematic media use, problematic interactive media use. And so we're really looking at media use that is not just kids just like to do it, but it's getting in the way of their ability to function across multiple domains, right? So we want to keep an eye, especially because excessive screen use, when I said, just minutes and hours in front of a screen aren't the most important thing, except in the extremes. When we do see excessive screen use, especially excessive screen use with age-inappropriate content, that tends to be way more closely coupled with worse outcomes than in that kind of messy middle, right? But what I think you're also surfacing is that these devices are not designed to help us transition. They're not designed to be like, oh, I'm done. And now moving on to the blocks. Like billions of dollars are being spent on children's eyeballs, right? And actually, let's just dive into this a tiny bit, because I think it's almost the elephant in the room, as if this is just this neutral object that we're like, oh, we do a belly breath. And then I'm like, iPad time's over. The reality is that the kinds of content that kids are watching really do matter, right? We've been saying whoever tells a story defines a culture for a long time. Stories are not new in human culture. Who's doing the storytelling? Why those stories are being told, and the kind of design tricks that are being used to grab and hold our attention are changing very quickly. So the kind of emotional regulation transition that we might see, and this has been researched, with emotionally intense kids coming off of a show like this tends to be pretty typical and manageable, right? As we think about a show designed like this.
Take a deep breath and count to 4. 1, 2, 3.
4. Right. So when we actually look at research looking at children, emotionally intense kids trying to transition off of PBS kids shows, their behavior is fairly manageable. That is very different from media that has been designed to grab and hold children's attention, which is the majority of the internet, right? And so the inundation of AI slop into children's YouTube feeds is not, if we think about executive function, nothing that we see here, except for the fact that parents see letters and they see sounds and they see animals. And we're like, oh, that's educational, right? That's like the kind of what. But early childhood is about the how we learn. And these videos are more or less just designed to grab and hold our attention. Whoop. Why on earth would that flamingo jump off a diving board? It's very confusing. Children look at things that are confusing to try to figure them out. Like munch, like we're just randomly throwing things, and children will stare at this. But I think through the lens of brain development, we don't see a ton of benefit, right, to this sort of content. The challenge is that only 20%, I'm getting to your question, which is like this landscape needs, this is the elephant in the room, diving off the jumping board. Only 20% of apps for 3 to 5-year-olds know what we call manipulative design features. Manipulative design features are there to grab and keep a child's attention. They're not there with a learning goal in mind. They're not there to increase communication between parents and children. They're there simply to keep your eyeballs on the apps. This is through quick rewards. It's also through social pressure. So my talking Tom, when you stop talking to Tom, he really lays the guilt trip on. He's like, where are you? Where are you going? You don't want to be my friend anymore? Why aren't you playing? Legos don't do that to kids, right? When they're done playing, they sort of move on to something else. And so these kind of contents map, this is hot off the presses and disappointing, right? In YouTube feeds for young children, 39% have bedazzling features, which is just like, don't look away. Vicarious pleasure content, that's like unwrapping videos, eating ice cream cones, looking at ramen. And then only 17% had educational content and only 15% had positive role modeling. So one of the things we can remind parents as we're thinking about skill building is also around choosing content. I do a lot of work with adolescents, and the kind of cool thing about early childhood is that we do have PBS. It's like parents of 15-year-olds are always like, where's the PBS? I mean, not that 15-year-olds would ever go there. But we do have a space that is developmentally appropriate, that helps children build emotional skills to transition off. That is not to say that there isn't good content on other channels, but this is a space that's not built around the attention economy. So that's kind of the elephant in the room. The challenge is that parents, when we're taking our media breaks, are not taking 4 deep breaths with Daniel Tiger. Like, we are watching TikTok, and that can be really dysregulating depending upon what we're going through. So just I think that the content question and coaching parents, not just around like media that's good for kids because it's educational, but media that's helping children transition, media that has a beginning, middle, and end that's based on a child's experiences. The younger the child, the more narrow the band of appropriate content. Like, the reason Elmo's World was created was because Sesame Street was very overwhelming for 2-year-olds. So we had to create something very targeted for young children, right? Under 18 months, children don't get a lot from media. That's not to say their brains are going to melt the second they look at it, but we don't have any evidence that purposely introducing digital content to children under 18 months or 2 years has developmental benefits. That was like it's hard out there, answer to your question. But what I do think what we can do with families is what we start to do is a good parent uses their phone less, a bad parent uses their phone more, as opposed to how are these things designed? Are these things designed to help us be our best selves, or are they just designed to grab and hold our attention as parents? Who's making money off my eyeballs? And getting a sense of agency and control as adults can be much more helpful than just a shame spiral. What other questions do you have? Yeah, good. Yeah, no problem. We're very good at delay of gratification in this room.
Or you could just talk about.
Do you want to use my
I
mic?
just talk extremely loud.
Okay, and I can repeat it.
Okay. Does the research say anything about co-viewing or using screens with children versus screens being used by children independently? Is there a difference?
Yes. Wow. Was that a good segue?
That transition.
It's like a plant on Zoom. It's like at 10:11, ask me the question about co-viewing. Yeah, ask the second question after, because this is really important. And actually, when we look at sort of the gold standard for young children, there are some resources that can help us if kids are going to be watching screens outside of PBS Kids, making sure parents know about Common Sense Media, very helpful resource for looking at ratings. But the reality is that children have a difficult time making sense of what they're seeing on screens and bridging that to the real world. We call this the screen deficit, the transfer deficit. It is very persistent through age 2, but for more complicated tasks, can go all the way up to ages 3 to 5. What I mean by that is something that we're learning on a screen. Children have a very difficult time then making it translate to the real world. So if I were coming in here and I was like on a video and I was like, I have a blue ball, I'm putting the blue ball under the chair. And then the child watches that video. And then we bring the child into that exact same room and we're like, find the blue ball. The 2-year-old is like, I have no idea. Even though they just watched a video in the same room of me putting the blue ball, until something very magical happens and an adult turns to the child and says, remember the video we just watched? Remember that woman had a blue ball and that room looked a lot like this room. Do you remember where she put the ball? Right to the chair. Because adults help children build bridges between what they're seeing on screens and what they're making sense of in the real world. And so that's why this co-viewing question becomes so important. What we call joint engagement is this kind of this gold standard in early childhood media use, which is that there's adults around children helping organize their media experiences. Now, there are 2 ways that we can talk about this. One is the magic of that the sound of your voice is the most powerful teacher in your child's life. So what a cool thing, because for the most part, it's free. And we have access to it wherever we go. So we can be talking to children and helping them think about their screen stories all the time. I will say, though, that sometimes the narrative around joint engagement feels really overwhelming to parents who are like, the reason we put on Daniel Tiger is so that I could bathe, like for the first time in 5 days. And so the idea that I'm going to be constantly sitting is just like, this is so far. So we want to do a both and. Yes, let's talk to children. Let's co-view. Second best is I just bathed and then I'm asking them about the show they just watched. How did that character make you feel? Oh, that character was so sad. Have you ever felt sad like that? What do you do when you're sad? I noticed Daniel took a deep, wow, Daniel Tiger's getting some good play this morning. What do we do when we take it? Or I watch those characters be really mean to each other. I don't think that show was made for kids. It would make sense if you're a little scared, right? We don't treat each other like that. And so let's watch something else, right? So when children are seeing things that are like, oh, that was not for me, second best to not seeing it is having a parent organize it for them, right? To say, that happened on a screen. I'm sorry you saw that. Here's what we're going to do to help you feel safe. Does that make sense? These questions are very protective. As children get older, they get better and better at sort of making sense of media experiences, but then we hit adolescence and they need parents all over again. So get used to it now because you're going to be asking about TikTok later. Great question. There was another question, Sydney, from the.
guidance or thoughts on sharing some of the best practices with grandparents, co-parents, and other folks caring for the child. For instance, there's a difference between setting up a child to watch a show versus a show and communicating about it with the child. I think it's a nuance gets lost a lot, and I'm wondering if there's a quick way to get that idea across.
Yeah, so a couple of things in there that we can pull out. One is this question around like parenting across caregivers and parenting across homes. One of the things that can be helpful, sometimes the conversations get ground to a halt when it's just, again, just around screen time. Like, I want less screen time, they want more screen time. Sometimes articulating like, what are my core values? Like, I really care about content, so I want age appropriate content. Or I really care that we're not having the tablet while we're going down for a nap. Like, what are the things that really matter to you? And trying to get agreement on a couple things, especially if the grandparents aren't primary care providers. Kids can do a lot of wild things for a day a week and be just fine. Different than if they're primary care providers, where whatever the brain does a lot of is what the brain gets good at. So starting with some success and some alignment around specific things can be more helpful than just time. And then I think the question around helping, so I think the question was around how do we help potentially other care providers or grandparents engage the kids? Yeah. We're never going to get full alignment. And children benefit from many ways of doing things in the world, as long as there's some consistency from their primary care provider, right? So sometimes there's too much conflict if we're going for full alignment, but I think getting some, again, back to those core values and what are the like sort of red lines, and then giving some ideas. So when grandparents feel judged, they're like, what? You saying I'm not a good parent? Like, I raised you. Well, how do we do when we feel judged? It's like, well, now, not only are you critiquing the way I'm taking care of your babies, you're kind of critiquing the way I raised you. And now I'm on like red alert. So starting with those strengths and being like, here's an idea that this is what I've learned. Here's something I've tried. Have you tried it? And catching them being great with the kids. Like when you ask her about that show, she lights up. She loves the way that you take interest. So it's cool that you're using shows in order to get other stuff done. But when you ask those one or two questions about what she was seeing, I watch her light up, and that's such a gift, right? So we're trying to catch some of those strengths as well. If there's red line things, then we have to have the hard conversations of like, age inappropriate, really scary media is like what are my boundaries that we have to be very clear about? All right, y'all, it's 10:18. At the end of the day, we could be here for the rest of the day. The reality is we could keep talking about AI toys. We could keep talking about every app. What's comforting to me as a caregiver is that the science does say that there's a lot of ways to get this right. And that asking questions, thinking about how do we increase parent-caregiver connection, communication, that we're thinking about ways to help engage people in reflection. Why am I on my phone? Is that getting in the way of connection, or is it giving me refuel in order to connect? What are the kinds of skills that I'm going to be building throughout this child's early childhood, but also as I embark on this rocky, turbulent, exhilarating road that we call parenting? And that on the ground, managing intense emotions is a lot more difficult than it sounds. And having resources, having home visitors, having school social workers, having pediatricians and family practice docs who are willing to walk alongside us and say, here's what we know about some of the best practices. Let's bring this into conversation with your lived experience. That kids who have parents who are able to talk to them, choose content that's appropriate, and also, of course, protect these other brain builders, right? The reality as we close is that parenting young children is often a delayed gratification activity. Some of it is instant gratification. Like we hold that baby close to our chest, they quiet down, we are flooded with oxytocin, and we're like, I was born for this, right? 2 seconds later, we're like, I hate this job. I'm so tired. I don't know what to do. I'm overwhelmed. I'm working between shifts. My partner just lost their job. There's a lot of things that parents are navigating. And in the moment, sometimes the easiest thing is to take that short-term reward. But the poetry, the invitation of brain development is that we're in this for the 25-year-old. The 25-year-old who knows how to feel really angry and knows how to manage their anger without hurting themselves or someone else. We're in it for the 25-year-old who knows when to text a friend and when to put their phone away and turn towards somebody and be present with their emotions. And we're also in it for the 25-year-old who says, let's not just have developmentally appropriate content on PBS Kids. Let's co-design and create a better internet so that there's more places for children to explore, to connect, and to play as they transition between digital and offline spaces that were actually built around children's healthy development and needs. But in the meantime, sometimes it takes 20 years for our kids to come back and say thank you, or for a parent that you're working with to come back and say thank you. So that's why we have to gather in rooms like this, turn towards each other and say if it feels messy, it probably means we're doing it right. Keep going, we got this. And the most important thing from the research is kind of remarkably human, that it doesn't look like we have created an app that replaces the back and forth interactions that helps us build brains. And in some ways that's like, oh, why can't we outsource this? And in other ways, what a beautiful and essential nugget of wisdom that comes through in study after study after study is that our ability to turn towards young children and turn towards each other for the support that we need is often the biggest buffer against a world that is full of challenges and stressors. So thank you for the work that you're doing with kids and families. Thank you for your ability to walk along this more complicated path with kids and the adults who care about them. And if you're here with your parenting hat on, please put your hand to your forehead. Give your cortex a rub. Say thank you. Thanks everybody for coming this morning. I'll stick around and we'll wrap up. We're going to moving on with the program. You need this to wrap up. But if you would like to stay in touch with me, you can find me at this QR code. I would love to know your feedback. There's nothing more precious than your time. So if you have time to give me a couple of thoughts about how today went, that's great. If you don't have time, you can click through those. You'll be taken to a Google Drive with a ton of handouts based on what we talk about today. If you'd like to put your email in, that puts you on the Spark and Stitch Institute newsletter. We send a newsletter out about every week. There's no pressure to do that. Just skip through that if you'd rather not, or send me a letter, message in a bottle, stay connected in another way. Otherwise, if I see you come in the newsletter, I'll send you a personal note tomorrow with some of the handouts as well. Oh, great. Great. Oh, good. We have time. Do we have till 10:30? Oh, yes. Oh my gosh, I got to do another close. Come up with another good story. I had 10:20 in my, oh, this is good because now we can, okay, great. We have a few more minutes. Okay. What are your questions? We have time for a couple more questions or I do have some strategies around screen time transitions that are very practical, if that's useful. So if that's a question you want answered, you could ask it and then I will answer it because that's probably the number one thing parents ask. Yes. Yep.
And we see a lot of kids after.
Yep.
I have one is, what does it look like or is there a role there for staff, right? Who may not have an established relationship with the kids where you need a lot of different things around.
Yeah.
And then the other side of that question is, what are your thoughts on this balance between kind of what we were talking about with adults, right? Where a kid maybe has been in school all day and been told what to do and has to follow directions all day long, and now this is their time to not. So, like, I'm just kind of, that's what I need to grapple with. What does that space look like in terms of you supportive caring adults in that?
Yeah. Yeah, especially because like you noted, so adults who are not, right, we're not having daily relationship building and probably aren't in relationship with their family over time. This is an opportunity, I think, in library spaces. There's a lot of really interesting tools around this idea of being a media mentor or a digital mentor and these sort of connected learning experiences. That idea of being a bridge builder and a curious adult goes really far. So oftentimes as adults with children, we come in and we're like, okay, this is the lesson I want to teach this child. It's like, here's the lecture I'd like to deliver. And there is some really important coaching we might need to do. And if there's some boundaries that are being crossed, we obviously holding a safe container for play and after school experiences is about having clear, consistent boundaries. But a lot of the role of those adults is asking curious questions. We want to be in relationship with the child about what they're doing online. And so the more that we have adults exercising curiosity, like, oh, show me a little bit more about what you're doing, or how did you get to that level? Or why did you choose this game over that game? Or what else and bridging that to offline things, like you are on level 5 million, that takes a lot of persistence. Like when you hit a struggle, what else do you like to do after school? What happens when you hit that same kind of struggle, right? We're asking these kind of bridge building questions. The more that we can have children's media use embedded in a rich set of social relationships where children are talking about what they're doing online. If we see something that's really unsettling, right? That's a threat to themselves, a threat to others, really unsafe content, right? There is something to be said about having an intervention. But a lot of what we're doing with children is also being like, we can talk to adults about these things. Because what we want to see as children get older is that they're not going to the darker corners of the internet to try to hide their online activities. Because the only interactions they've had with adults are get off that, it's a mindless waste of time, and I don't want to hear about it, right? That we have adults who've said, you know what, now we've been on this for however long, we're inviting them into other material spaces. You are so into this. It sounds like maybe music is of interest to you. Do you know that we have these instruments over here that we can bang on and we can do things, right? So we're sort of creating what are those bridge building offers that we can start to draw children through relationship, even if it's short, in what's their interest, what are they doing, and how can we build bridges? Just as a thought. The Connected Learning Alliance, if you're looking for ages for older children, has really cool resources for library professionals around that same work of overlapping interests, digital skill building, and offline skill development. The Connected Learning Alliance, they have their most recent work is really aging up a bit from the early childhood space. Yeah.
Like, that's not easy. It's primarily for parents, like, here's how to make sure that your kids can't go to places you didn't want them to go when they're on their tablet or on their computer.
Yeah, so the question was, when you were a parent, right, you kind of felt like, oh, it's so hard to set boundaries. It feels so overwhelming. I feel like constant failure. Has that gotten easier? No. Two things have happened. One, technically, we have more tools at our disposal. So we have more sophisticated parental controls. We have more sophisticated monitoring software. We have 1 million content providers to choose from. What we know in surveys with parents in the United States is that they feel exhausted by the maze of parental controls. Unfortunately, we've created an internet where we've outsourced the burden of protection to the user. So as opposed to creating an age-appropriate space for kids, we've said there's some good stuff and some really bad stuff, but it's the parent's job to set up the controls to make that a safe space for kids. So what we hear from parents is that they're exhausted and that each platform doesn't have default settings that set them up for success. So you have to go in and find the parental controls. Now, Common Sense Media is a great resource. That doesn't mean that we just say, oh, there's nothing we can do. So we can, the ultimate guide to parental controls on Common Sense Media. For young children, creating the smallest digital playground is probably our best bet. Like, oh, we only are doing this show and PBS Kids or whatever you've decided, as opposed to trying to wade through the wide internet every day. So we have more tools than we've ever had at our disposal, but they are a full-time job to try to manage, is what we hear from families. So we want to support them with what's the most simple way, sending them those resources. I'll send you some parental control guides in your Google Drive that I think are really helpful. How do you set up YouTube Kids without auto scroll? How do you set up a supervised account for a 6-year-old so that you're just choosing the YouTube channels The algorithm isn't choosing it for you. So I can send you those guides. So the answer is yes, easier. And given the number of guides that parents are getting, it means it's really hard. Which is why we can also advocate for policy, right? So that's kind of the work that we're not necessarily going to wave a wand right now. But I've been really involved in work around age-appropriate design codes and looking at the work in the European Union around what if we actually had tech companies be held accountable for creating design that's child-centered. We can dream and work. And I think there's changing motivations around it. Yeah. Okay, now it's 10:30. And to close. I really appreciate the questions, and what I'm even hearing, this is as a final wrap, is our ability to be curious and turn towards each other, and our ability to problem solve. Us human beings continue to co-regulate throughout our adult lives. And if I have a home visitor who's coming into my home that I feel like is on my team, and that is walking alongside me as I do the Herculean task of raising a healthy kid today, I am much more likely to be able to access the superpowers of my cortex in order to be a learner and in order to be curious about myself, about my kids, and all the ways we could grow. So thanks for modeling that with your beautiful questions. How fun to get some bonus time, which was not bonus time, is in the contract. I just lost track. I really appreciate time with you. See you online. Find me at sparkinstitute.com. If you have a teenager, you're welcome to grab a book. Otherwise, we'll move on to our program. Thanks, everybody.
Good job. Hi, everyone. Thank you, Ladies Fest. Thank you so much. That was so fun. Like, it was really engaging, and I learned a lot, and it was a lot of fun. So that's great. We're moving on in our program, and we are honored today to present the second annual Little Moments Count First 1,000 Days Champion Award here in the St. Clair Valley. So we did this last year, and we're doing it again this year. Really exciting. The award was established to celebrate local individuals, organizations, or coalitions who go above and beyond to support parents and families during that first 3 years of a child's life. The award recognizes those who show up with care and consistency and compassion to walk alongside families during that transformative and important time. It's very clear that this region is full of people who care deeply about families. We've gotten to meet a lot of you over the last couple of years here on the council, and it means a lot. You're all doing important, meaningful, and often quiet work to make sure that every child has a chance to thrive. While choosing just one champion was not easy, today we're thrilled to recognize someone whose impact has been deeply felt by the people around them. Please join me in congratulating Marla Butler, Program Manager at the Family Resource Center, St. Clair Valley, as this year's Little Moments Count First 1,000 Days champion. Thank you for coming up here. To help recognize our amazing awardee, we're inviting also her nominator, Angie Pilgrim, Vice President of Community Impact at the St. Clair Valley Foundation, who's going to share more about her dedication to children and families. Now, do you want me to hand you the large certificate now or later? Let's wait, it's a little heavy. There you go.
Hello, well, good morning, everybody. As Carlin said, I'm Angie Pilgrim. I'm with the St. Clair Valley Foundation. I'm going to tell you a little bit more about that in a minute. I've been with the foundation for about 12 years, which is hard to believe. And one of the first nonprofits I had the privilege of meeting was the Family Resource Center, their then leader, Patty Drexler, which that was a few leaders ago. Shortly thereafter, I had the privilege and honor of going to visit the Family Resource Center and meeting Marla and seeing her in action with parents and with children, and have since been back to the Family Resource Center several times to see wonderful Marla and the relationships she builds there. So I'm just going to read the nomination I submitted, if that's okay, so Marla can hear what got her this big, beautiful plaque. So Marla's dedication to supporting parents and families in the first 3 years of life is evident in every aspect of her work. She has devoted her career to this field, consistently advocating for the needs of young children and their caregivers with persistence and with compassion. She has stepped into a leadership role now at the Family Resource Center, bringing clarity, collaboration, and a strong sense of purpose to her work and to the entire organization. Now, what truly sets Marla apart, however, is her ability to build quick, meaningful, and lasting relationships with parents. She is deeply trusted by the families she serves and is known for being warm, approachable, and genuinely responsive to their needs. It's through her advocacy, leadership, and authentic connection with families she has made a lasting impact in her community and exemplifies what it means to be a champion for parents and family support. So a huge congratulations, Marla, for your good work. Hold this.
Okay. Photo of just Marla, nothing photo. Okay, yes, thank you. Yay, thanks, Taylor. Thank you. Yeah, you'll have.
Yes, I will. Okay, so I'm pinch hitting for Marna this morning. And though Erin was able to deliver over an hour of a presentation completely without notes, I have a few sheets here that are going to close us out that I'm going to use this podium. So first of all, Marna, if you are online, we send our best wishes that you are healing up. She's not feeling well this morning, so they asked me to please provide closing remarks, which I am happy to do, so thank you for the privilege. First of all, I want to thank you all so much for being here today, both in person and the 100+ people that have joined us online. We're so incredibly grateful for this. What a wonderful resource that was here today with us. Erin Walsh, for sharing your expertise, your honesty, your humor. I laughed quite a few times, and your practical insight this morning. We thank you for all of you for taking the time to be a part of this conversation and for this community. Let's just pause and huge round of applause for Erin. So I took a lot of notes. I'm guessing you did too while Erin was talking, but one of the things I appreciated most about today's conversation was the reminder that this topic is more nuanced and many of the messages families are receiving today. So I wrote down messy, complicated. It's not a simple story, right? So technology is really, truly deeply woven into our lives. Many caregivers are feeling really grateful for it and really worried about it at the same time. And both of those feelings can be true. What stood out throughout Erin's presentation was the reminder that the conversation cannot simply be reduced to screens are bad or good parenting means no screens, right? We need to practice what she said, this critical tool called empathy. She reminded us that we actually know kids. We've done a lot of research on kids, and that healthy development is still rooted in the same things it has always been rooted in: connection, relationships, playing, communication, maybe some boundaries, emotional support, and opportunities to build skills over time. And there was also a whole lot of compassion in today's message, right? Caregivers are using technology for many reasons. Rather than responding with guilt or with judgment, we are inspired to approach these conversations with curiosity, with reflection, and with support, because ultimately what children need most are connected adults, not perfect adults. So even in a digital world, those everyday little moments still really matter very deeply. So thank you again. Really appreciate your time. I'm excited to use the QR code to follow the work that you're doing. So now to the thank yous. First of all, I want to thank Dr. Mike Adams. I think he buzzed out of here for kicking us off this morning and for the good work he does here in the Valley, but also over in Honduras. That's amazing. I want to thank the amazing team at Health Partners for the wonderful work you're doing here in the Valley. We really appreciate it. And the team that's here today, I know you did a lot of pivoting are pivoting rather last minute to make today happen. So just a huge thank you to you for your continued work here in the Valley. A special thank you to all of the Little Moments Count partners and the members of the St. Croix Valley Council. If you're on the council, if you can raise your hand. Anyone here? Yes. A lot of members on the council who continue helping to grow this work throughout the St. Croix Valley, throughout this region. It's your collaboration, it's your ideas and relationships that are really making this effort possible here in the St. Croix Valley. So we thank you for that. I want to thank Kristen Mullen. She's at home with Lewis. I'm wondering if she's watching today. You said maybe. Just for all the good work. She is a thumbs up. Just huge congratulations to you, Kristen, and thank you for your ongoing work here in the Valley. Okay, now the notes say that I'm supposed to thank the St. Croix Valley Foundation, which is me. And that would be, or us, that would be rather awkward. So instead, I'm going to just take a second because some of you may be thinking, what is the St. Croix Valley Foundation? Well, the St. Croix Valley Foundation is this region's community foundation. We serve 6 counties throughout the Valley. So Chisago and Washington counties in Minnesota, and then Burnett, Polk, St. Croix, and Pierce counties in Wisconsin. And a community foundation is all about making a geographic region better. We connect donors to community needs and opportunities. And I just want in this moment to thank a donor we have in the room today because they recognized a need, they saw an opportunity, and based on research they heard about 20 years ago, they said, gosh, we need to support the first 1,000 days. And so they came to the St. Croix Valley Foundation to establish a fund called the First 1,000 Days Fund. It is an endowed fund that will forever, on an annual basis, make funding available to the good work like Little Moments Count, like Family Resource Center. And so I just want to take a moment. They're super humble and they don't necessarily like to be recognized, but I just want to acknowledge Bill and Rita Lawson, who are in the room. Thank you. Thank you for the good work you've made possible through the First 1,000 Days Fund. Thank you for trusting the St. Croix Valley Foundation to make your vision, your passion come to life on an annual basis. It has been a pleasure to work with you to figure out what that looks like through our grant making. And so just a huge thank you. If you'd like to learn more about the First 1,000 Days Fund, I believe there is a QR code on the program. You can connect to the fund, you can learn more about it, can learn more about us. And of course, I'm always happy to talk to anyone if you'd like to learn more. And I also want to acknowledge that Heather Loughlin, our president and CEO, is in the room. So thank you, Heather. Okay, so lastly, so what's next? What's the call to action? So if today's conversation really resonated with you and you're interested in being a part of this work and this growing network, we would love to have you join the Future Valley Council meetings. And I believe that they have dropped a link into the Zoom chat telling you more about how to join. And I believe there's also a QR code in the programs where you can learn more about joining the Valley Council. Help us make this good work continue happening in the Valley. Help us work with those parents and with those littlest children and improve our communities in doing so. Lastly, before you leave, we'd also appreciate you taking a moment to complete the very short post-event survey using the QR code on the screen or in your program. Your feedback really helps us shape future programming and deliver content and events that you're looking to see happen here in the Valley. Okay, so as we continue growing Little Moments Count here in the Valley, let's carry what we heard today from Erin, from others, forward into our work, into our relationships, our communities, and our everyday interaction with children and families. So I thank you again for showing up, for giving us a couple hours of your time this morning, for caring and for being part of the effort to help every child feel connected, supported, and able to thrive. So please feel free to stay after, connect with your peers, connect with one another, continue the conversation, ask questions. We'll be here for a little bit yet. So thanks again. I look forward to talking. Well, thanks for the good line. What's that?
Patty's watching online. I got a text from her. It just, well deserved. Just. She must be thinking. Thank you. I'm very honored, like very surprised. And then we have Carlin as well.